Hello. Welcome, everyone, to Live Seattle. We are very excited to have you here tonight. I'm Lisa Hymas, the executive editor of Canary Media. As most of you probably know, Canary Media is a nonprofit news outlet covering the transition to clean energy. We have a small team spread across the country. I live right here in Seattle, and I'm really excited that I was able to get some of my colleagues to come join me and put together some great conversations with clean energy thinkers and doers in the Northwest. So tonight we'll have some lively conversations on stage, as well as time for you to eat, drink, and socialize some more. We're also live streaming this event, so we want to say hi to the people watching from home. Thanks for tuning in. This is the third Canary Live event that we've had. The first two were in New York and Boston, and I finally convinced everybody to do one on the correct coast, so we're happy to have folks out here in Seattle. And we're planning more now for other parts of the country. So in October, we'll be in the Bay Area, and next year, watch for events in some maybe less expected cities around the country. So these kinds of events are core to what we do at Canary Media. The energy transition is a huge story, it's a global story, but it's also a local story. There are projects and initiatives and policy advances happening in cities and communities all around the country, especially now that there's a jolt of funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're covering many of those projects and trends through our reporting and our podcasts. But we also want to bring people together in person to talk about clean energy in their communities, to help people make connections and learn from each other. So thank you for coming tonight to be a part of this. As I mentioned, Canary Media is a nonprofit, so we rely on the support of readers and listeners and fans like you. If you appreciate what we do and want to enable us to do still more, please donate to Canary. We've got some QR codes on posters at the entrance and back by the food and drink. And if you're watching from home, there should be a QR code on your screen. That'll take you right to our donate page, and we appreciate any support that you can offer. I want to just say a few thank yous before we get things really rolling tonight. First, a big thanks to KEXP and their staff for working with us. This is such an amazing space, a storied radio station, and we're really excited to be here in this venue. It's perfect for us. We also want to say thank you to groups that helped spread the word about the event. So that includes GRIST, Evergreen Action, and Virtue Lab. And we definitely want to say thank you to our caterers for tonight. That Brown Girl Cooks, delicious food. Thank you so much. Okay, so getting to our lineup tonight, first we'll have a conversation on stage led by Canary Media's editorial director, Eric Wessoff, on putting the Inflation Reduction Act to work. We have three accomplished folks joining him, all with different insights and perspectives on the IRA, and I'll let Eric introduce them. And then we are going to have another 45-minute break, so you can refresh your drink, get a little more food, talk more amongst yourselves, and then at I think about 8:45, we're going to have the second part of our program. So that's a live taping of a Volt's episode with David Roberts interviewing Ramez Nam. So don't leave before the end. You don't want to miss that. So thank you all so much for being here. And I'm going to hand things off to Eric now.
Hello. Hi. We've already voted the third panelist off the island. It's not true. Amy Harder is our third panelist, and she just got here. Her plane was delayed, but she made it, and she'll make a dramatic entrance onto the stage in a couple of minutes after she's freshened up. Thanks, Lisa, for introducing us and telling what Canary Media does. I don't have to do that now. Also, thanks to KEXP. For me, I've seen so many great bands on video at this place. It's just, as a music lover, it's great to be here. And I'll speak for a couple of minutes, and then we'll turn it over to smart people on our panel. I don't think so this panel and part of Canary Media's reason of being these days is about the IRA, and I don't think we're enthusiastic enough about the sonorously named Inflation Reduction Act. There probably there's 1,000 better names for it, but I want you to feel my enthusiasm. This is the most epical, monumental, seismic, game-changing. Can somebody give me another synonym of how important this is? Bombastic. Thank you. Epical. Yeah, I can't say that. We're being recorded. And it rivals, I know it's ancient history, but it rivals the New Deal in terms of, and if there's just blank stares on what the New Deal is. FDR put $3 billion into recovering from the Depression to fund the New Deal. $3 billion in 1935 dollars is $60 billion in modern day numbers. The IRA is $400 billion just devoted to energy. The Loan Programs Office is giving something like $500 billion to clean tech. So I want to emphasize that you won't see anything in your lifetime in terms of federal legislation that's as much of a BFD, thank you, that we're living through today. And the other point I want to make is more ancient history, sorry. Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House from 50 years ago, said that all politics is local. It's not his quote. And here, making her dramatic entrance is Amy Harder. Thank you. Fresh off of a delayed flight and a hectic cab ride here, so thank you. Thank you for getting here.
You're very welcome.
But so just like all politics is local, all energy deployment is local. It involves your community, your neighborhood, your neighbors as employees at the companies that are deploying energy. So did that somehow convey the excitement and intensity that we're living through at this very moment? There's plenty of things that can go wrong, but at the moment, optimism and scale is really called for. Okay. So I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves because they can do a better job of it. But let's start with Jessyn, because I used my amazing Google skills to locate her Wikipedia page, and it mentions that she was voted most likely to be a politician by her high school class. She was also, and you'll get to hear their accurate call on that. She was also the leader of the SAC section at the University of Washington. Go Huskies! Go you Huskies! When she's not doing those things, she's the director of Seattle's Office of Sustainability. So, and that really brings, she's going to be exactly the person we want to talk to, as well as these other folks, in terms of local deployment. And so, just as an introductory, give us some words about who you are and why you're here, but also tell us what the IRA looks like to the director of sustainability in a municipality, right? You're not building a solar factory here. You're somewhere in the Southwest. There are IRA funds available to municipalities. So again, give us a little introduction about who you are and tell us what the IRA looks like to you, maybe what it looked like when it was first announced about a year ago, and what it has evolved in your thinking.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. As Eric mentioned, I am a recovering politician, and it is possible I'll fall off the wagon at some point. We'll see. I am a former state legislator. I represented Northeast Seattle in Olympia. I am a transit geek in my heart. I ran Transportation Choices Coalition and advocated for big regional light rail investments. And thank you. Thanks to all of you for voting yes. And what I learned from that experience is we can do really big things in this wealthy, creative region. And that's exactly what we need to do on climate, right? The hour is very late. We have dilly-dallied for now decades. And suddenly we're in this place, though, where the issue is, well, it is money, but it isn't as much money as it used to be. So in the sense of we have new federal dollars, we have new state dollars. I see Representative Beth Dolio in the audience. Thanks to her leadership and others, the Climate Commitment Act also has funding. And so the job now is to move quickly to deploy this money, to decarbonize transportation, to decarbonize our buildings, to plan for resiliency. And there's a real tension in moving quickly, which is that we also need to move at the pace of building trust, particularly for an institution like Seattle, with those communities that have experienced racial and economic injustice, years of disinvestment, environmental harm, and that's Black and Indigenous and people of color in our community. So there's a real tension in our work at the local level right now, which is that we have to move really quickly because climate change is upon us, this huge bow wave of a heating planet. And we also have to be able to do it in a way that really centers people who are the experts in their own lives. And having that conversation and dialogue takes time.
Great, thank you, thank you. Amy, so glad you made it, really. It's kind of just-in-time delivery. We appreciate that. Amy is the executive editor at Cipher. She was previously a climate journalist at Axios, at National Journal, at the Wall Street Journal. And early on in her career, she worked for the Bellingham Herald, whose lead story today is, "What's the best plant store in Whatcom County?"
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Eric. And it is, I think it unfortunately highlights the really challenging time for local journalism. And I remember, just a quick side note about my career, I'm originally from Washington State and indeed was an intern at Bellingham Herald right upon graduating from Western Washington University. Raise your hand if you went there, woohoo. Got a few of us in the house. And I had moved out to DC to do another internship. The Herald had offered me a business reporter job, and I could either move back and go to that job or try my luck in DC. And I'd just moved across country and I didn't want to have to move back again, so I decided to stay. That job was cut 6 months later. So it's really sad to see that that's the front page story, not to kind of bring it down a notch, but it's an amazing paper and an amazing town and a great school. So I was really happy and I'm thrilled to be back here. I moved back to Seattle in 2020, not because of the pandemic, but the timing is certainly suspicious. As Eric said, I lead a new publication. It's called Cipher News. We cover energy and climate technologies. Would love for you all to sign up if you are not already. We're supported by Breakthrough Energy. Some of you are hopefully familiar with that. It's the Bill Gates-led clean energy group. And we launched in September 2021, and we have big growth plans. And one of our best models of success is Canary Media, so I think we should give them a round of applause.
Ooh, thank you.
And indeed, if you haven't tried to fly this summer, it is a complete mess. I don't recommend it. I'm just coming back from the Aspen Ideas Festival, where climate was a big topic, and I am so thrilled that my flight wasn't delayed any more than it was. There we go.
So what was your take as a journalist when the IRA was first announced, the BFD was first announced, maybe as opposed to now? Were you optimistic then and less so now, or what have you learned in the last year that's changed your opinion?
Well, I think, I think we've already talked about, to me, I'll go back to a column that I recently wrote, and the headline was "The Wild and Wonky New Climate Reality That We're Living In." For decades, really, we were debating, is there a problem? Should we address this problem? And there's still a few folks who are having that conversation, but most of us are moving on to solutions. And so I see now we're having all of these incredibly wonky conversations, whether it's over electrolyzers or the National Environmental Policy Act and permitting.
Just
And-
wait, we're going to be talking
Yeah.
about
Taxes.
tax
Taxes,
policy.
taxes.
Tax policy is coming.
Exactly. And so as a reporter who's been doing this since 2010, I remember talking to climate deniers a lot and, talking to lawmakers about really basic things. And now we're having to get into the weeds, and it's an incredible place to be. I think a hard reality we're running into is that as hard as it was to agree on the problem, the solutions are even harder. So I think it's a glass half full situation. I think permitting, John Podesta, I don't know what he said today at Aspen, but hopefully he said interesting things about the name of the panel was Hard Hat Environmentalism. Can we build things again? I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle, frankly. And so that's where I'm looking. I'm going forward.
Great. All of our reporters these days are wearing hard hats whatever interview they're doing. They're in a factory. I was wearing a hard hat in an electrolyzer factory a couple of days ago. It's not my best look, but it's certainly something that we are in factories these days. We're in places where they're building things. This is Rahul Shendure, close enough. And he's the CEO of Carbon Built, and he's going to talk a lot about concrete and tax law. So tell us a little bit about concrete. Tell us about what your company does. He mentioned that concrete is the second most used substance on Earth. What's the first used? What's the first? Water. I thought that I was looking for stupidity as the answer.
Not cynical at all, are
Okay,
we?
so anyway, it's water. It's water, but right. So water doesn't count. Water doesn't count. It's really concrete is the primary used substance, manufactured substance, man-made substance on Earth. So, tell us a little bit about your company and how humans work with concrete today.
Perfect. Happy to do that. So before I talk about Carbon Build, let's just do the primer on concrete really quick. So concrete is cement, water, and sand and rock, right? Most of it is the other stuff, but the glue that holds it all together is cement. And cement is the problem. So concrete makes up 10% of global CO2 emissions, and 90% of that is from the production of cement. So Carbon Built is delivering technology and services to the existing concrete industry to allow them to substantially decarbonize the product. So we make ultra-low carbon.
I'm going to interrupt. You did say it's 10% of global emissions. So let's let that hit home of the impact that this material.
Yeah, it's huge. And I spent most of my career, so I've been in climate tech for almost 25 years, most of that on the energy side. And after working in hydrogen and biofuels and other sort of new renewables, it really struck me that there's a slice of the pie that we don't have solutions for yet. And when I looked at that, concrete was really the one that stuck out as the hardest. So yeah, it's big and it's hard, and if you can figure out a way to solve it economically, I think we've got a big opportunity.
Okay, and tell us what your...
Yeah, so Carbon Built enables concrete producers to make ultra-low carbon concrete, right? So substantially decarbonize the product, do it in a way that is no compromise for performance, right? That's obviously table stakes in a business where we're building buildings, but do it in a way that increases profitability for concrete producers. And this is critical, right? I don't think any of us working in this space, anyone who's interested in climate, is interested in going slow. The only way you're going to go fast is by following the money and making people in the existing value chain more money. And so to me, that was the unlock that got me interested in this, is using the existing industry and infrastructure to go fast on something.
And so do you build one massive concrete plant? This softball's coming at right here. Do you build one massive concrete plant in one place and ship the concrete all around the world? Or what is the distribution, what is the manufacturing topology look like?
No, and getting back to your point earlier about all politics being local, all concrete is definitely local, right? It's not a product that travels well. So unlike cement, which is made in big billion-dollar factories. Concrete is made in thousands of factories around the country. And as a result, we're dealing with basically small and medium-sized businesses. And it's a completely different approach you have to take than working with the oil and gas industry or, huge wind farms. And, that provides an opportunity, I think, to make the IRA, to make climate tech meaningful for people all around the country instead of just, maybe just those of us who care about carbon. And
your first plant is in Alabama.
Yeah, a long way away. So the technology was developed at UCLA. Alabama's about as far as you can get from, the coasts. And that's one of the things we love about it. So we're there because the technology was piloted at a Department of Energy test site. And the concrete producer that was closest to that site has history with the team and with the technology. So when we said, we're ready to take this commercial, he put his hand up and said, I want to be first. Like, I've been a part of this for a couple of years now, and this is important to me. And, an interesting anecdote is that he had to negotiate with his parents, who are co-owners in this business, and who didn't have the same energy about this as he did. And that was a big deal for him, right, to do that. But as a parent of young kids, it was important to him, and he's been.
And you said a lot of these smaller shops are mom and pop shops, right? They're not billion-dollar entities.
Yeah, exactly. So we operate in the masonry space, which, if you've been to Home Depot and you bought pavers or the hollow concrete block, it's a segment of the industry that's meaningful enough for us to grow a business. A third of the plants are single plant owners, right? Family-run businesses. Maybe another third are regional players. So here, Mutual Materials is the kind of leader in the Northwest, and then a third are big companies. And
okay.
They all, the mom and pops are moving the fastest on some of this stuff.
I just got a text. Tommy Tuberville is taking credit for that factory.
For my Alabama plant? Great. We'll have him at the ribbon cutting.
Jessyn, you hinted at the fact that we can't have the energy transition. It has to bring everyone along for it to be a real energy transition. So how do you make sure that the changes that the IRA are accelerating bring everyone up, and that disadvantaged communities are not overlooked? I know it's a big question. There's departments for that, but how do you enact policy that makes sure everyone gets a fair share of the IRA?
So there are a lot of different things that we're doing on that front. One of them is just using planning and data and looking at the way wealth and health and carbon emissions are distributed across the city. That plays out in our built environment and in our neighborhoods. So you have a neighborhood like South Park, which is adjacent to the port and all the attendant environmental justice issues that go with that, that has a 14-year life expectancy less than a neighborhood like Laurelhurst, which is historically redlined to the sense of keeping people of color out over the years, a lot of housing wealth there, predominantly white. And so, you can just use the city's built environment as a way as one of the lenses for looking at where to deploy resources, who to be spending time deeply engaging with and listening to solutions. And I can talk about a specific solution that we are really working hard to figure out how to do, which is electrifying heavy-duty trucks. There's applause there. Let's hear a big applause for this. Among the things that we have to do is electrify heavy-duty trucks. And so the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma, there are 4,000 drayage trucks that go between the port and logistics facilities, and they go through neighborhoods like South Park and Georgetown that have to deal with the truck traffic, that have the air pollution that come with it, and the noise, and all of the things that go with that. So now we have the IRA and we have access to funding. We also have the CCA, and in the city of Seattle, we enacted a payroll expense tax, so there's local dollars for this as well. So we have this ability to layer federal, state, and local dollars to solve these things. But then you get to actually doing it. So you look at the heavy-duty truck issue, and it intersects with a lot of these problems that we've just laid out around health and wealth and carbon emissions and neighborhood impacts. But then how do we actually go to electrify it? We need to identify land for charging. Well, who wants big truck depots next to their neighborhood, right? Especially a neighborhood that's already having to have a lot of these kinds of impacts. How do we get the Port of Seattle to play along that may have different political incentives than the city of Seattle? How do we deploy these incentives for independent drayage truck drivers, many of whom are immigrants and refugees, working on the margins, maybe not necessarily wanting to be first in line in terms of taking risk? So there are all of these different things that we're sorting through to figure out how to deploy electric trucks.
In an equitable fashion.
That's
yeah?
right.
Yep. Okay. Amy, I'm so glad you made it. I'm sorry, I'm still vibing from the panic we had earlier.
You and me both.
Okay, good. So I'm glad you're here. Journalists, we're an earnest bunch. We want to do good things. But there's an enormity to what we're covering here, right? When we have editorial meetings, it's what can we cover and there's a universe of stuff we can't cover that moment. What is climate journalism getting right, getting wrong, and how can we do better?
Well, first of all, I think the last couple of years has seen an incredible growth and explosion in really good climate journalism. Canary Media is an amazing example of that, so is Cypher. More of the mainstream publications are also really growing their teams, which is incredible to see. So there's a lot of good journalism focused on solutions, which is great. I think one area of improvement could be better linking the challenges of developing countries, the entire continent of Africa and Southeast Asia in particular, linking their incredibly well-justified desire to have just as much energy consumption as us, hopefully in a cleaner way, but still our lives just like ours, and how that fits into our efforts to address climate change. And so that's one core focus of Cypher. It's why our team is very global. We have Europe, just hired somebody based in Abu Dhabi, focused largely on COP, but we'll also be doing some coverage in these other parts of the world. And I think that's just hard to do because, like you said, Eric, there's so much to cover and it can feel a little overwhelming in an incredible way. I mean, think about all the change that's happened in the last year, and there's so much to cover. We can get into like the depths of electric trucks or hydrogen. I know hydrogen has been a big focus of all of ours, right? But there's so much, one fact that I learned recently is that if the entire continent of Africa tripled its electricity overnight using only natural gas, it would only increase global emissions by 0.6%, which I think lends an interesting perspective on this debate of, we can't do any more fossil fuels because there's this urgent climate crisis. Well, yes, but we also need to take a measured approach to some of these other parts of the world. And so that's something that I think we can all do a better job at, certainly including Cypher.
Okay. All right, you brought it up. You mentioned the H word, the hydrogen word, and you've done some recent reporting on it. As an expert, tell us what your take is on hydrogen. Tell us what the IRA's take on hydrogen is, and game out what the next couple of years look. I know this is the question of the year, but what's your take on hydrogen?
Well, in one sign of the times, the Aspen Ideas Festival, which many of you may know, is a pretty general audience, high level but general audience festival. I moderated a panel on hydrogen, and the title was "What's all the hype about hydrogen?" and there was standing room only. Now, I should caveat that it was a small room, but that's okay. Still standing room only. So even beginning in 2020, actually before the IRA, there was a big push toward hydrogen. I remember writing about it when I was at Axios. In a lot of the COVID recovery packages, there was this big push for hydrogen. And I think part of that is because from an oil and gas perspective, it really lends itself well to their existing skills. They burn things, and so they're burning hydrogen, right? So that's their interest. And then hydrogen got such a big role in IRA and the infrastructure law because it's such a good tool for the hard-to-abate sectors like cement and steel and these other areas. And so that's, I think, one reason why it's gotten so much attention. Bill Gates calls it the Swiss Army knife because it can be used in a lot of different ways. I think because it's a Swiss Army knife, I don't have a Swiss Army knife, but some of the tools in there are better suited for other things. Will hydrogen be a light-duty vehicle fuel? Probably not at this point. There's a few automakers still trying to make that argument, but it's probably going to be electric cars, even with big trucks, right? It also seems to be trending toward that. So it'll be interesting to see, answering a question specifically about the IRA, which one of the use cases rises to the top, and how does that affect different areas? Will it be long-duration energy storage? And will that push out other technologies? So that's one thing I'm watching. And then an extremely wonky thing, I know here, you and I, Eric, know it well, and maybe the audience does as well. There's this big fight over how can we make sure the hydrogen is produced in a clean way. I won't get into the details of that, but that's really important. And in a sign of our wild and wonky climate debate, the American Clean Power Association was herding its cats. It's a rising trade group in this world, and it got on the same page with all of its members who had different perspectives. But in the meantime, it pissed off a few of its allies, like the Hydrogen Fuel Association, the Nuclear Energy Association. And that's just a sign that, your allies and enemies are constantly changing, and sometimes you have frenemies in this debate. So those are all the things I'm watching. Very lastly, another subtle, not so subtle plug for Cypher. We had a great chart this week that shows just how tiny the amount of renewable energy hydrogen is today, and that the scale up is massive. So although these debates about how to produce hydrogen are important, we just got to get going. And we don't want to lose sight of the fact that the scale up is huge, and we should focus on that.
Okay. There are certainly tens, if not hundreds, of gigawatts of green hydrogen capacity being announced, if not ground being broken for those factories, for sure. It will be, keep your eyes on hydrogen over the next couple of years. There's going to be some great success stories, and there's going to be some interesting flame-outs. Wrong word for hydrogen, but...
Well, and just a quick addendum to that, there's a lot of people that I've talked to who say the IRA subsidy might be too generous, and we could be funding some companies that shouldn't get funding. And that's part of the game, but you can bet that Republicans will make sure to point those out when and if they happen. For
sure. All right, we're still talking about the IRA and how you're funding your technology and it's scaling up. So tell us a little, now this is the opportunity to make 45Q and 48C sexy and exciting. But tell us a little bit.
The names alone.
It's really, I mean, again, the same people who named the IRA figured out the names for those tax credits. So tell us about your market has to be jump-started, right? The green concrete there's no market for it now, and it needs a little bit of a boost. The IRA provides that, and feel free to talk about, is it providing 10% of the cost of the concrete, or 50%? Like hydrogen, you mentioned, very generous. It might be a half or all of the entire cost of generating hydrogen might be incentivized. Tell us about, and we also were talking about voluntary carbon markets as a contributor to financing that. Tell us which buckets are going to be utilized to make it happen.
Yeah, so let me say a little first about just the way the technology works, just so you have a sense of that. So I mentioned before, cement is the bad actor in concrete. So we go into a concrete plant, we give them a recipe to make concrete that uses dramatically less cement, right? 70%, 90%, 100% less cement. We replace that with a cocktail of waste or byproduct materials that are available all around the country and world at large scale. They're inexpensive because they're the waste material, and they can substitute for cement if you combine them with carbon dioxide. So that's a broad statement, but in our case, that's the way we make that work. So you end up with something that delivers on concrete's requirements from a strength standpoint. It's substantially decarbonized because you've gotten rid of most of the cement. You've actually used CO2 to make the product. So about 80% of our impact comes from the reduction in cement, 20% from the use of CO2. And because you've taken out the most expensive ingredient, it's cheaper to make, which means the producer is making more money. So the core economics and the core theory of change here is not about sustainability. It's not about customers saying we're willing to pay more for a green product. It's about the producers saying we can make more money by making all our product this way. The cost reduction alone is probably not enough to get them to change the way they've made this product, right? Their parents made it the same way, their grandparents made it the same way, and if they're going to change the way they do that, they need a little extra. And that's where things like carbon credits can come in. That's where different incentives in the IRA come in. And they help to take this thing that would otherwise be a okay return, but probably not enough to overhaul the way you've been doing business, to something where this is just such a good moneymaker that they're willing to change the way they do that. And this is a conservative bunch, and they're not, that's following increased profits is how you make this happen. And
so I have a knee-jerk reaction when I hear voluntary carbon markets, but that's just born of my cynicism and skepticism and having lived through Clean Tech 1, 2, and 3. But you are storing carbon dioxide in the concrete blocks, and they are a more permanent storage of carbon dioxide than, say,
a tree,
sorry, which can be abused. That storing carbon can be, there's accounting games that can be played. So it's a high quality carbon storage method, right? As opposed to a temporal, a limited time.
Permanent.
Yeah, there you go. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
We, on the credit side, which again is like one of these things that we can use as a sweetener to make the economics really palatable. We can talk about the IRA credits, but on the carbon credit side, we generate credits for the carbon removal. In our case, in Alabama, we're using waste biomass to generate we're unlocking CO2 from waste biomass. We could use direct air capture as an alternative. We're taking that and we're permanently storing it in the product. And someone, generally not the producer, not the end customer of the concrete, but someone's willing to pay for that storage. And folks like Stripe, Shopify, Microsoft have stepped up to start seeding our technologies like ours, companies like ours. So that's one credit. There's also a credit generated on the avoidance side, right? The not using cement in the product generates a different type of credit. And all these are important. They're investments in, or it allows third parties who care about making this change to
like
invest
Stripe, like Microsoft.
Exactly, and more and more. I mean, I think certainly those companies did not make their investments to be the only ones, and I think we're just at the start of these markets, and there's going to be problems. They're going to get better, and I think we're excited to be a part of that.
Okay, Jessyn, hi.
Hi there.
The Seattle mayor has an initiative to cut GHGs from existing buildings, which apparently will tap into IRA incentives. Mm-hmm. There's also a Seattle tree program that could tap into IRA money for urban forests. In the words of our executive editor, Lisa Hymas, who knew, right? And so this is what we're talking about, is that the IRA is not this top-down edict. It happens at the municipal, local, and civic level. So tell us a little bit about some of these programs, if they're simply just, are they actionable? Is there ground being broken, or are you still waiting for someone to divine the tax law on what it actually means to you. So, and you're also, you have a history of wonkery and leadership in transportation in the EV world. Tell us where the IRA path from Washington to Seattle
Okay,
lives.
so trees, buildings, and transit. Okay, who wants to talk about buildings first? Okay, so a few building folks. How about trees?
No, not tree
And
people
how about
here.
transit? Okay, we're
All
going to
right,
start
well,
with transit. Great, I'm glad. So we have very aggressive goals in our city to get 90% of all trips by 2030 either EV or walking, biking, transit. So this is a really, really aggressive, big goal. I'm going to take a minute and talk about how we get people out of their cars, and then I'm going to talk about the whole electrification of our transportation system. So the good news about getting people out of their cars, is we already know how to do this. How many people here have an ORCA card? A lot of us do. Great, look at that. You can't see it on the podcast, but there are a lot of people here. So when you align incentives and disincentives and great transit and free bus passes, as it turns out, people make different choices. Our friends at Climate Pledge Arena, the Kraken, one of the things they're doing is including a transit pass on your ticket. So when you go to a Kraken game, you get a transit pass, and lo and behold, a lot of people are doing it. Another thing the Kraken helped do is integrate the monorail with your ORCA card. So maybe some of you even took the monorail as you got here, which is great. And then just a couple other quick transit wonky things. City of Seattle added tens of thousands of jobs between 2010 and the pandemic, 2019. No net new car trips. And that's because we had great transit coming online, businesses participating and getting people bus passes, and then really high parking pricing. And so we had this huge success of getting people to take during peak commute hours. Like, let's keep in mind that these programs were really driven around those times. People who are working at other times were maybe not quite able to access the same kind of great transit. So it's just to say, we actually know how to do this, and to the extent there's a climate crisis and we should be acting today on this, we can be deploying the same kind of creativity around this next generation of trips. What would it look like if we figured out how to get all trips related to healthcare, walking, biking, or transit? We just, thanks to the folks in the state legislature, we just enacted a free bus pass for all people under the age of 18. What if we reoriented our transportation system so that we were really focusing on getting kids where they need to go without having to get driven by their parents or riding their bikes on dangerous roads? So it's just to say there's this whole element of reducing carbon from transportation that we already know how to do. And we just need to roll up our sleeves and be really creative. We need to be place-based. We need to understand what people want in their commute trips or their, shopping trips or healthcare trips, and create the systems that we need to do that. Okay, so then there's electrifying all the other trips, all of our cars, trucks, and buses. And this is complicated, and it's a big deal, and there's a lot of money. So there are things that we need to think about, like where are charging stations going? What are we doing about, people wanting to upgrade their homes and have charging stations and heat pumps? I mean, as long as you're doing decarbonization, you might as well do both. One of the ideas that I've recently had is in the same way, this is for homeowners, if you, get a mortgage, maybe we can tack on some additional financing when you buy your house to upgrade all of your decarbonization so that you're able to spread the costs over a period of time. So somebody in here is in fintech.
Like PACE?
Like PACE, but for homeowners, exactly. So the idea here is how are we being opportunistic and how are we scaling? So that's kind of what that is. There's a whole question in the city around how are we allocating sidewalk space? We have a lot of competing uses of sidewalk space, streeteries and walking and biking and accessible sidewalks, trees, and then you layer in charging stations. We don't have a policy yet for how we allocate all of those different competing needs. And so those are the kinds of things that we're working on the charging. So you stop me because I can jump right into trees and buildings.
I'm going to stop you now, although those yearbook people, they were prescient certainly in their forecast, for sure. Amy, So glad you're here. This isn't. We only have a few questions left in the time we have, which this went super fast, and we could go on a lot longer than we are. And this is not the. I'm hoping you can put a positive spin on this next question. But what Dark Brandon giveth, Robert Kennedy Jr. taketh away. The IRA is a politically motivated, non-bipartisan piece of legislation. What are the, and you're not our Washington IRA correspondent, but if you can tell us a little bit about what are the chances of a non-aligned administration shutting some of these things down?
I think it's very unlikely, not because it's going to be popular with a potential Republican president or current Republicans in Congress now, just because of the inertia of how hard it is to repeal things that have already been passed. We saw that with the Affordable Care Act in the first Obama administration. It's just hard to do that. And secondly, you are seeing a slow, sort of quiet, subtle embrace of these laws in some Republican districts, even if you're not going to hear them cheer about those laws. And so I think those two things combined make it so it's unlikely. Now, I think I saw, Governor Ron DeSantis said something how he's going to get rid of the Energy Department and EPA. We're having flashbacks to what, then candidate Donald Trump said. So even if the IRA stays intact, there will be a lot going on that could be extremely challenging to the effort on climate change, but I don't think there'll be a huge successful effort to repeal these laws.
Okay, especially if there are employees in Alabama in the concrete plant.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's what I'd add is one, if you've spent time around DOE on programs like this, whether it's particularly grant programs, you will recognize they are moving incredibly fast, like way faster than they normally work. And that's, it's, no one would ever say government moves as fast as a startup, but they're moving fast. And I think they're being very thoughtful about where projects get, where shovels go into the ground. And sure, there's merit review and all these things, but they've always asked, like, what districts, is the work going to happen in? And they spread those out. And I think we get particularly to do more on that because we have smaller plants operating in more places, but I think it's all going to add up to it being
So I have one last question for you, and it's not IRA centric. You're also an investor. You've made, I looked at your portfolio, you've made 20 or 30 clean tech investments from early stage to middle, medium, across various stages. And by the way, you actually noted one or two that failed, which is, you don't see that a lot in venture capital portfolio lists, though somehow disappeared off the page.
If that number grows, then maybe I'll be a little less crazy.
But you did mention that you've backed 36%, companies with female CEOs are 36% of your portfolio, and the same number, 36%, are people of color. And that's compared to the industry average of 2% or 3% or 4%, right? In charging up, we have that stat. It's 2 or 3%. How do you do that?
Yeah,
we're all faced with trying to change the makeup of our companies and to make them more diverse, and we try to do it at Canary Media, but it's difficult. The numbers you're putting up are, I wrote above average, but they're way above average. And so what is the process for making that happen? That's something that has to be addressed. Like I said, the energy transition has to bring everybody along, and entrepreneurs of all flavors. How do you get that done?
Yeah. So I had the benefit, just as a bit of context, I'm not investing hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. It's a But it was a deliberate decision to spread that money out over many companies.
But you're on a cap table somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it was just paying attention, right? Part of what my approach is not overanalyzing and having to make, making quick decisions. And I rely on working in these spaces for 20 years to be able to hopefully make slightly better decisions than others might, or than I would have if I didn't have that experience. And so I think mainly for me, it's just paying attention. And if I see that opportunity, there's more than ever today, right? You don't have to be a venture capitalist to get access to good deal flow. You don't have to be writing $1 million checks. So when you see those opportunities, you give them a little more time you give yourself a little more time to get conviction. And then, we're trying to create the world that our kids are going to live in. And I have two opportunities to do that. It's investing and hiring. I think we're doing a pretty kick-ass job at Carbon Built on that front. And then the other is where the investments go. So,
all right. This could go on a lot longer, but Rahul, Jessyn, Amy, so glad you're here. These are three engaging panelists, and thanks for their time, and thanks for your attention. You.
All right. So thanks again to Eric and our panelists. Don't go anywhere. At 8:45, we're going to have part 2 of our event. So Ramez Nam and David Roberts will be having a conversation on stage. You won't want to miss it. So take this opportunity to go to the back of the room again, get some more drinks, get some more food.
Or swarm our panelists.
Yes, or line up to talk with our smart panelists. So thank you, everybody.
Line up.